Hello everybody, goodness me, 6:59. I'll be kicking things off very shortly. Anyway, thank you for having a look, and just a few more minutes and we'll get started. And I hope this is the first time I'm using my mobile phone to do Facebook Live, so sorry if the image isn't so good, etc, but we'll see how we go. Okay, anyway, so I guess I might as well get started. So anyway, my name's John August. I was the lead Senate candidate for New South Wales for the Pirate Party. And let me see if I can, yep, there we are, it's a bit better. So, but here's my post-election report for the 2019 election. So thanks to everybody who voted for Sarah and myself. Now, if you've checked out the Facebook site, I'll be going through a few topics. They're sort of listed. But obviously you can also ask questions and comment along the way. So I'll hopefully try to answer some questions. Now, I might not have good answers. I might not have answers that'll satisfy you, but at least I'll try. So anyway, in New South Wales at this stage, we've had a vote of 0.35%, which is about 14,000 people. I think there's in the order of 4 million people or so to vote. And that's actually a 0.1% swing in our favour. So compared to last election, we do seem to be connecting more, and maybe we'll see some good results in the later preferences as things develop. But I suppose there's some progress we've made, some connection we've made, but I guess we need a lot more to get reasonably high votes. But in some ways, a 0.1% swing, towards okay, bit of a comment there. I guess never mind. It's I'll do my best, I suppose. Anyway, so 0.1% around the state. Now, I expect that was partly the result of Sarah and myself handing out how to votes at railway stations, and also the volunteers who were helping us on polling day. I'm aware of people who handed out in Warringah, Darlinghurst, North Ryde, Macquarie Fields and Gladesville on polling day, and it was good to have them help. And we also had a volunteer help hand out flyers at Redfern Station prior to the election. But looking at a few polling places, I do see two significant results. One was at Bennelong Gladesville with 1.05%, and that was a total of 1,900 votes. And okay, a few comments there. Let's see. Okay, well, Sarah, good to know that you've joined us, and Leo, maybe what are the possibilities of nerds joining forces? I think we just sort of reach out and talk to each other and do our best. I think it's certainly possible. But anyway, yeah, so there was also in the electorate of Werrowa at Macquarie Fields Central. Now that was 1.72%, whereas a total of 348 votes. Now that booth where myself and Andrew Downing were at Gladesville, that was one of the largest percentages I've found, within excess of 1,000 votes. And Macquarie Fields, that electorate is also quite significant there, where I had a volunteer helping. So there's some other notable ones. There's Macquarie with Bilpin, 0.88%, and that's a total of 567. Macquarie also had Bligh Park East with 1.14%, and there was a total of over 1,000 people at that booth. So Bligh Park East, that didn't have people handing out, but I know I talked to people there about the Windsor Bridge, and maybe they remembered me. And Bilpin, I guess that's also another place that had some votes, and maybe Sarah handed stuff out there, or maybe it's just random or a concentration. All right, so okay, Rowan Air Science Party, what is it? Here 8 Flux. Okay, well, all right, there's obviously been some discussion there. Let me just have a look at the website, and I'll reconnect myself and have a look at what's going on. So I'll be able to have a bit of a more detailed look. it is taking a while to do that. Now, so I do appreciate everyone who handed out how to votes, and you know, basically 0.1% is about 4,000 people. So we had 4,000 people voting for us, and obviously we can wonder how that came about, but certainly partly as the result of people handing stuff out. Now, when you hand stuff out to people, you do get a few converts who look at our policy and say, wow. And you also have the people who say they've never heard of us, and after all these years, and there's people who are dismissive of us, so there's certainly quite a range. So anyway, let me see if the website is updated. It's still struggling. I've only got, my connections are a little bit all over the shop. But anyway, so there's also the smug people that you get into, like some of them from the Greens saying that we should change the name of our party, and I'm actually certainly settled on the name Pirate Party in spite of that controversy. Now, if you've a really clear self-explanatory name like Help End Marijuana Prohibition or the Affordable Housing Party, that's pretty clear and doesn't need any further explanation. But I don't think we could ever rename the Pirate Party to something so clear and unambiguous it couldn't be understood. We need to accept the Pirate Party will always need some unpacking, some extra explanation. And we get fired up at elections, but I guess we need to get fired up in between elections. And let's see. Okay, here we are live, and okay, so a few comments there. I'm finally able to have a look at them. So what do we got here? All right, so let's see now. All right, well anyway, thank you for the people taking an interest in commenting anyway. Anyway, I guess I'll continue now. Help End Marijuana Prohibition did actually get 2% of the vote, so that shows you how many people see government policy around that issue encapsulating what they think is wrong with government, the frustrations with the government. So I think there's a lesson there in terms of understanding how people are frustrated with government, and I don't want to undermine their vote, but at the same time we can try to paint a bigger picture that drug decriminalisation is a part of our greater policy package, and that we're a credible party because of that range of policies. Now, the Liberal Democrats polled well at 1.8%. That shows a certain frustration with government, though I'd have a lot of common ground with them regarding excessive bureaucracy, but I'd rather not privatise the ABC. So there are points of difference too, but they capture an interesting feeling of frustration with government. So let's see, I'll have another look at the... Okay, so Julie Mitchell is commenting that there's no representative in South Australia now. Would point out the next party congress, I think it's at the end of July. We're still working on the dates, but we are actually planning to have that meeting in South Australia. So yes, no South Australian people these times around, but you know, we are obviously making a presence there. Okay, here's a question. Stentor Chandas, do you feel that the party name Pirate Party might perhaps alienate a significant number of potential voters who might concur with the party platform if they took the time to get past the name? I think that whatever name you have needs extra explanation and will be ambiguous. You know, if you call yourself the Libertarian Left Party, for example, I think that's very likely to be misunderstood anyway. So yes, it is a challenge. Our name, on the one hand, attracts attention, on the other hand, needs some extra explanation. But I'm comfortable with the name. And, you know, look, to some degree, it's a competitive process. If people do want to independently set up a left libertarian party, no one is stopping them. And perhaps, you know, it's worth seeing how they go. So let me see. Liberal is repeatedly successful and not representative. I'm not sure I understand that comment, but never mind, I'll continue. So anyway, so another political party is Sustainable Australia. There's also the Affordable Housing Party and the Science Party, which got a bit more than us, up to 0.41%, illustrating those particular interests. While I'm comfortable talking about population, and I've spoken with Mark O'Connor on my radio show, I'm also happy to leave that policy to Sustainable Australia. Now, I see too many people trying to hold our party to ransom over a lack of engagement in this policy area. I mean, if people do come on board the Pirate Party in a genuine sort of way because they're interested, and later down the track they're sort of saying, hey, maybe you want to look at population, well, who knows, maybe we'll see. I don't think we're in denial about population issues, just that our energy are more usefully directed our energies are more usefully directed elsewhere, and good luck to sustainable population Australia for the traction they get. As for affordable housing, now our set of policies does include some Georgist principles, and that should actually address that issue, though maybe it's something that we are struggling to provide an explanation for. So, okay, I can see some discussion about the name of the party. I'll leave you guys to it, I think. So now there's also a range of conservative or nationalistic parties that did better than us, and I don't plan to talk about that in detail. There's also a range of parties with other particular policy interests, for example, the Small Business Party, that did not do as well as we did, and that's perhaps an indication of how much sway these different ideas have in the community. And there's also a Climate Action Party that did better than us, and I'll be talking about climate action shortly as its own thing. So let's have another look at some of the questions in circulation. Okay, well, people are worried about the name of the party, and I can only say, I guess, for the rest of us, it's something that we have to get along with. Now, okay, so what are some lessons from the election? Now, I had my own challenges to deal with. I was originally going to run as a lower house candidate in Bennelong, and I changed to being a Senate candidate relatively late in the piece, and lost some momentum that I would have had in the Bennelong campaign. Now, that change of focus meant that I didn't keep in touch with some people who were actually originally going to help me with the Bennelong campaign, and by the time I got back to them, they'd moved on to other things. That was unfortunate, but Kate, who was previously the other Senate candidate, I appreciate her contribution to the party while she was able to, and quite understand that she wasn't able to continue with the candidacy. Now, one thing I'll mention is that it was hard to get mentally in the mould for an election in the lead up to its being called. Now, once an election is called, it fires you up and you get energised. But the strong psychological challenge is to get fired up before then. One other problem was that we were running with fewer people who had experience running a campaign before. And while we had a bit of a recipe on how to run a campaign, it was harder to realise. And I'll also say I have been on the National Council, and if you're not on the National Council, in some ways you're out of the loop, but you're also more able to focus on your campaign. Now, when you're attending National Council meetings regularly, it tends to absorb your Pirate Party time budget, and you've less psychological energy available to run your own campaign. Still, it's a trade-off with it being on the NC, but kudos to Miles and Brandon for being on the NC and still running vigorous campaigns. Well done, guys. I'm sorry I wasn't able to match you on that one. Now, during the campaign, there was a litany of delays and stuff-ups on my part too, and perhaps I'll remember the lessons for next time. I think there's the old children's rhyme, for want of a nail, the horse was lost. And in some ways, I guess the things that did undermine us were what you might call, pissy little administrative oversights and things like that, because our final flyers were only printed on the Friday before the election, and that delay was partly because we in the party had delays getting our final preferences sorted out, and also because the printer was so slow to realise that I wanted things really done pronto. Now, offset printing is cheaper, but it has more lead time, and when they were eventually printed, they gave me a good price, but I guess that was how things went. Now, the Pirate Party has a legacy of two great things. One is our developed policies, and we can hope to use those policies to bring more people into the party, either as members or supporters. And that detail, I think, can be intriguing. We've got to figure out how to leverage it. And so we'll cover the policy in detail later. But one other thing the Pirate Party also has, its legacy, is a recipe on how to run elections. And having been through a past election, I was able to draw on that experience and roll out some of that recipe. but we had much less top-level coordination, and to some extent we were making it up as we went along. Now, a senior member of the party was uplifted by the energy that the candidates, myself included, all the candidates put in during the election in spite of the lack of top-level coordination. And for him, he found that really important, or was sort of inspired by that. Now, for me, it meant there were issues I had to become familiar with for the first time. I struggle to do graphic design myself and navigate my way through the idiosyncrasies and bugs of the program. And, I had to figure out, what the options were for printing flyers and how to negotiate that myself, and costing and lead time and so on. Now, on the one hand, you might say that wasn't so hard a thing to get a head around, but it was another thing to worry about in the context of all the things that were swirling around me. Now, having things printed well in advance and being able to reach out to more volunteers would have helped. Perhaps you've seen the large number of people handing out for the Animal Justice Party. If we could do something comparable, that would be great. And also there were people taking an interest in my candidacy on Facebook, and it would have been good to reach out and maybe enlist you as volunteers. So it all got a bit hectic and it was hard to pull off. So sorry I didn't reach out as much as I would have liked to. Now, we also ran a fundraiser to get the money to cover the candidates' deposits, and that was appreciated, certainly, if you put the money into that. Now, we as candidates also put additional money into printing ourselves, and I know that Sarah and others lost some income because they were obliged to resign for the duration of the campaign. So everyone who put in that money for that fundraiser, thank you, much appreciated. Now, it would have been nice to have more money to put into the campaign as well, but to be honest, we would have struggled to spend that money effectively. But if we had more money, more volunteers, had stuff printed in advance, and had that top-level coordination that we have in previous campaigns, that would have been quite an improvement on things. Now, I'll have another look at the discussion. I wonder if there are any questions that I can get my teeth into. Okay, people talking about the name. Okay, liberal, my gosh, it's very, let's see now, can I actually, okay, this, unfortunately, I'm not able to really see the comments clearly, but anyway, I will continue. And now, another thing I'm going to talk about is reaching out, and some of the connections that I made and some of the media coverage that I did have. So there did seem to be a lot more connection during this campaign with interested people on social media, on email and elsewhere. And that, I guess, if you think about it, 0.1% is actually 4,200 odd people, and that's something like a 1/3 increase in the number over the last election. Now, I think there's probably some rounding errors sort of messing things up, but it's actually encouraging in its way. And I suppose on the one hand you might say, 0.3 odd percent, but 4,200 people, that's a lot more people, and I guess we can see that communication. But the thing is, I guess if we were going to get like 4% or 1% or whatever, my gosh, that would be even more communication, even more connection. Now, perhaps you've seen the videos that I've posted, or the presentation that I gave at Speaker's Corner in Sydney, or the interview I did on a Chinese radio station in the ACT. And there's the post that I made to my website. In particular, there's an article I wrote on the fracturing of ideas in Australian politics, and that seems to have had a lot of hits, even if I did incorrectly predict the Liberal Party collapse. So I have actually linked that to an early description on Facebook. So, it's nice to put your hat into the ring and get a bit of a reaction. And, maybe that was a lot of people who voted for me or took an interest. But, yeah, one third, an increase in 1/3, 4,000 extra people, that's impressive in its way. But I guess it shows you that if we're going to get to 4%, that's an awesome number of people to get to that stage. And 4% is where we actually get our deposit back. And so I wonder if that will that's actually a quite positive sign, I suppose, is what I'm saying there. And yes, I'm blowing my own trumpet about my own website and my own articles, but now I might get on to an election analysis. Well, actually, I'll have another look at the questions and the now. As I say, I guess unfortunately my computer's interface is struggling a bit to show me all the comments, but never mind. I can't see any actual questions for me, so I guess I will continue. So I'm now going to do a bit of an election analysis and look what happened. So lots of people have stuck their oar in, and I guess I'm going to put mine in as well. Now, I personally didn't want to see the Liberal Party win, but I try not to be overly critical of the Liberal Party either. For me, the Liberal Party's gone off the rails because they've been taken over by the religious and economic fundamentalists. And I look back and think, well, I should have actually voted for Dr. John Hewson in times past. And I'd also like to think that we can attract disaffected Liberal Party voters. Now, the Liberal Party ideal of recognising personal initiative has some worth, but I think it's been twisted beyond all recognition by their party processes. But, you know, hidden within that whole Liberal Party rhetoric, which I suppose some of us find offensive, there are some kernels of worth. It's just that they've done some horrible things with the little bit of truth that they carry around. Now, the Labor Party have got their own policy mix, and one of the things that the Pirate Party does plan to do is this grand-scale tax reform, including an emphasis on land value taxation and the removal of negative gearing. So the problems that the Labor Party has had are actually also of concern to us. So the point is that while many people I know thought that the Liberal Party had gone off the rails, they nevertheless persuaded a sufficient number of people to vote for them. So what happened there? And when I say gone off the rails, a friend of mine who used to vote the Liberal Party quite regularly, he says that they've gone weird on him. So that was his feeling, but again, they still managed to win government. So I think partially it was people's concern for their personal financial circumstances. But let me flesh things out, because I think the regular Liberal Party story didn't actually cut it that well. And the Liberal Party were actually thrashing around, trying lots of different things till they finally hit the mark. Because go back far enough, Hockey was talking about the end of entitlement, and there were inquiries that hit brick walls and so on. And then further down the track, Morrison was talking about government not spending money as well as individuals in the community would. Now, I think this also fell flat. I think only a minority of people viscerally resent paying tax in principle. For the most part, we accept that we need to pay tax to have services and keep things ticking over. We might have some concerns over value for money, but that's a far cry from the resentment Morrison was trying to tap into. But separately to this broad brush assertion, which I think was mostly ineffective, Morrison did tap into a concern about people's first personal financial circumstances. There was a lot of wrong ideas out there about death duties, for example, and the idea that the Liberals are better economic managers, and that certainly doesn't seem credible to me. Now, much as I disagree, I think it was here that Morrison hit the mark. And the fact that the Liberal Party had actually tried other things and shows you that they were experimenting with this and that, and then they finally connected. Now, there were also some people who were not that fazed about losing franking credits. They never thought that they were fair to start with and didn't mind losing them. But perhaps these people were outnumbered by those who were only thinking with the hip pocket nerve. Also, there was Queensland. I suspect the issue was Adriani, with people concerned about jobs and the economy, with Adriani's impact on jobs and the economy being grossly overstated, and a resentment about people down south meddling in Queensland's affairs. But equally, I understand the Libs pushed ahead a bit in Tasmania, and Labor really didn't make any progress elsewhere in Australia. So I think that's all worth taking on board when it comes to selling a tax policy. Perhaps rather than talking about the good things our tax policy does, we should talk about how our initiatives will affect people in different particular financial circumstances. Now, I'm just about to take a bit of a look at the environment, which I said I would do. I'll take another look at the questions. Okay, now, 14 minutes now. Why can I not see the questions? Okay, last one seems to have been 7 minutes ago, but unfortunately my web interface is not really showing me a lot of questions. Anyway, let's have a look here. I will try updating and see if I can see anything more. Never mind, I guess. Okay, well, at least we've got a few people giving me hearts and thumbs up and so on. So thank you, people. That is much appreciated, that I've got some positive comments. And as I say, I've been trying to keep track of the comments along the way, but they somehow seem to have fallen off my web interface. And we've also got Brandon, who's joined us. So thank you, Brandon. I did actually give Brandon, yourself, and Miles a bit of a bouquet when I said that, in spite of the fact you're both on the National Council, you still ran a vigorous election and just seem to have just so much energy there. Impressive, I must say. But anyway, I might continue. I was talking about the environment and the fact that there was an environmental party that outpolled us. Now, one of the things that, unfortunately, we didn't actually update our policy on the environment, so we somehow managed to incorporate a job guarantee into our policy. And it did seem like that a moderate number of people were voting based on a shopping list. Now, sometimes that shopping list might be selfish, considering how their personal financial circumstances are affected. But it might also, in its own way, be principled, if perhaps lacking depth, when all people seem to worry about is our policy on Adiani or the Paris Agreement. And my comment here is that the perfect is the enemy of the good. But nevertheless, it meant in this competitive policy environment, we were squeezed out because our policy didn't address current issues in climate change. And I also think that our policy did actually address a lot more concerns than was recognised, but I guess it was hard to explain that. And you also had stories of young people voting for the first time, being very concerned about climate change, and their voting legitimacy was being challenged by the Liberal Party, or perhaps I should say Liberal Coalition. And now, if we assume for the sakes of argument there's something called a superficial vote, but I do in fact credit these first-time voters with legitimacy, please understand, but my feeling is that the Liberal Party will only criticise superficial votes when they are voting against them, but look to one side and whistle when people are themselves voting for the Liberal Party for superficial reasons. Now, but while you could see a pattern of votes in the Senate of people who were voting on climate, this vote was not sufficient to swing the whole election, and we might even say that the climate vote worked against Labor in Queensland. Sad but true, and I think that does need to be recognised. But also, maybe it's wrong, perhaps even patronising, to think that all young people will be uniformly concerned about climate. Maybe some of them will just want to get on the bus to the big end of town, but we don't get to hear them because it doesn't make good news to wave microphones in front of those people. So that's one of the things about potentially media bias. Now, I'll take another brief look at the... Okay, now, there is a question here, and I have to admit I do not have a good answer for this one, but I know Anne asked, what ideas for new jobs? Am I right that Adiani will only make around 1,500 jobs? Has anybody heard of the Singapore buying wind energy from Australia? And I can't actually answer that question in detail, Anne. I would have to say that my understanding was that the impact of Adiani on the Queensland economy was actually quite small, and their mine was going to be automated. So yes, there's going to be a bit of employment during first construction, but then basically only a very small number of jobs generated. And Singapore buying wind energy from Australia, that is new to me. I have to say you'd have to have a very serious cable. I think our cable to Tasmania conveying power was a very serious cable, and my gosh, this cable all the way to Singapore would be quite a venture, I must say. But all right, that is news to me. It's not something I'm able to comment on detail. As I say, wasn't sure I was able to answer all questions or answer them terribly well, but I will try. Okay, but now I'm talking about general pirate party impact. So I will be getting into some details of policy shortly, but how do we get the pirates to have more traction? Now, we encapsulate a particular set of concerns about government overreach, privacy, corporate overreach, and a particular policy set which I think does a better job in engaging with realities of the world around us than anybody else. For me, my particular beef is over intellectual property, but that doesn't stop me from running with these other issues. But a lot of these concerns seem to resonate with relatively few people. Now, let's look at Assange, for example. It's a controversial issue, but let me see if I can try to encapsulate a pirate party policy, hopefully without too much personal spin. But we challenge the bully boy hold that the US has over international affairs and endorse Assange the whistleblower without endorsing Assange the arsehole. Language warning there, I suppose. I'd also point out that just because I recognise the bullying of the US does not mean that I want to give China or Russia a free pass. Arseholeness is not a conserved quantity. Just because the US is an arsehole does not mean there's any less chance that China or Russia will likewise be arseholes. So I guess that's a slightly more complicated position in foreign policy. For Assange, there's several hooks you can use to develop an interest. That the US are trying to abuse their position to try to hide their crimes, that Assange is an Australian citizen and is not being treated well by our government, regardless of those other issues, or that the debacle undermines the integrity of the fourth estate, the media in our society. But just like climate, what if people don't really take an interest in this more broadly? Now, for me, issues of civil liberties and transparency of government resonate, as does intellectual property. But it is, sadly, all too easy to be cynical about the media. For every story that uncovers government corruption, you have a sensationalist page one tabloid story, or something that is a political axe grind rather than reporting. While the media can live up to its grand promise, in many cases it does not, and that spoils it for everyone, and makes it harder to get traction with these issues. Media integrity is its own issue, but perhaps this behooves us to bypass the mainstream media. But going off on a tangent, we in the micro parties have had very little coverage in the mainstream media. Maybe that's special pleading, or perhaps, I guess. Still, to the extent that you're listening to this, I think it's something to think about. But in the context of all this, what we need to do is to get more people fired up about the radical alternatives that are encapsulated in the Pirate Party, and not just preach to the converted. The fact that some people do look at our policies and go, wow, is heartening in its way. What we need is a virtual revolution where more people are willing to appreciate that there are significant problems with the world and look beyond regular politics to the solutions encapsulated in the Pirate Party. This might be because we reach out to them and connect with their concerns, or equally because we persuade them that our concerns are worth coming on board with. Either way, it doesn't matter. Now, there's another explanation for why Labor did poorly, as pointed out by Steve Maxwell, that Morrison was a better public speaker than Shorten. Well, actually, there's a comment here about... okay, well, someone's not as impressed with Assange as others are, I suppose. I would like to think he's been important in facilitating leaks and sort of scrutiny of government and being a whistleblower. But I guess not everyone will acknowledge that. And if you're not able to see this, Leo has said, Assange is the world's most infamous web developer no more. So I guess there are other views on Assange. But anyway, getting back to another explanation for why Labor did poorly. As pointed out by Steve Maxwell, Morrison was a better public speaker than Shorten, and maybe that was a factor. But let me also point to the different challenges and opportunities faced by ourselves and Labor. With Labor, it was all too easy for a false story to be spread about them, and Labor struggled to put its case forward and challenge this story. However, the Pirates have a different challenge and a different opportunity. On the one hand, relatively few people know about us, but on the plus side, when they do find out about us, my suspicion is that they are more willing to look into our policy detail as described by us in our flyers and on our website, rather than rely on what someone has told them or the prevailing ideas in circulation, as with Labor. Now let me have another look at these comments. Okay, all right, a few. Okay. Well, okay, sorry, was reframing not a criminal, not yet being treated as one. Okay, so there's, I guess, different views on Assange. Now, continuing with what I was talking about, that Labor, basically, everybody's talking about Labor. They're in the terrain, so people aren't necessarily willing to go to the source to find out what Labor's on about. But I would like to think that because the Pirate Party is so new and novel, people are actually willing to go to the source and not just rely on second-hand information. Or at least I would like to think that's the case. And to me, that suggests another strategy. We should lean on our policy detail, which will hopefully intrigue people if they get as far as actually checking it out. However, we should structure our website so that the first bit of information makes a clear statement of what we're on about and how we have a superior answer to the challenges facing all of us. And then make it easy for people to check out the policy detail if they get sufficiently intrigued to go there. A middle tier saying, we have policies on this and this and this in a list, with clicks to the main policy would help. And then there are further elements we could incorporate. If you're a pensioner, a carer, a sole trader, an employee, how would you be affected? If you're concerned about climate change, animal justice, secular issues, refugees, the economy, housing affordability, what are our perspectives on those particular issues? No change to policy, just structured differently and made more accessible. But to supplement, okay, there's a question here. Okay, Malcolm is asking how many web views did the page get during the election? And I don't know which page you're talking about. If you're talking about my own web page, goodness me, well, for the sakes of argument, 5 or 6 times more as usual. I'd have to look at the exact numbers, which, you know, if I've got a bit of time left before 8 p.m, I'll see if I can do that. But what I notice, I suppose, at least on my own web page, is that there's some articles related to me and the election that seem to rate quite strongly. And that's even my commentary on the New South Wales election, or an election 3 or 4 years ago, or, you know, something that I did politically 5 years ago or something like that. But they all rate strongly. I guess people perhaps are wanting to find out more about me and what I've said in the past, even if they're not necessarily interested in, you know, what I've got to say about things at the moment. Okay, but continuing with what I was talking about, strategy here. To supplement this strategy, we somehow want to raise our profile between elections, so people might in fact be tempted to check out our policy. We do this by making pertinent comments on newsworthy items doing the rounds. Of course, just by saying stuff doesn't mean that we'll get coverage in the mainstream media, but we can bypass those gatekeepers using social media. But then the problem is that we want to reach out to more than the usual suspects. But equally, in social media, it's all too easy for social media to isolate us into our respective silos. So maybe paid outreach will be worthwhile, and we can hope that we will intrigue potential allies more than it just serves to get existing enemies steamed up. And I guess you've got to be careful about paying people in social media to give yourself coverage. Are you making deals with the devil? And there are stories of some very underhanded and unethical games being played in social media to swing the Brexit vote. And I suppose at least we in the Pirate Party are transparent, and if we do go down that path, it would be transparent. Okay, so there's some ideas, and though it's easier said than done. I mean, having ideas is a start, and good ideas that are taken seriously is even better. And still better is good ideas that are taken seriously and acted on. But one thing at a time. Now we'll be looking at some other policy areas of 18C and basic minimum income. But let's have a look at the comments. Okay, Leo's sort of saying that social media have become the censors, and that's a very fair point. I can but say that Andrew Downing, who is one of our members, does actually articulate some quite considered points along those lines. And it was he that actually pointed out this particular thing about how Facebook was being used to swing the Brexit vote. So I can only encourage you to look at the forums for the Pirate Party. You'll be able to find some of the positions that Andrew has put forward. Censorship as a service, I don't understand that one. Anyway, I will continue. I was going to talk about 18C and then also basic minimum income. And we're at 7:40, so I think we're making reasonable progress. Okay, now Anne North, well maybe I will divert a bit before I start to talk about 18C. Now, Anne North is saying, not sure about this, but I believe that scare tactics work on part of the Liberal Party. Now, webpage, how safe is your personal information? How much does the government know about you? Do you know the laws of your information? Well, I think certainly outlining the risks out there and putting emphasis on that, that is, I guess, part of the story that is worth telling. So I guess, Anne, you've got a bit of a point there. Though I will say I'm a little bit familiar with some of the stuff going on in Warringah, where Tony Abbott ultimately lost his vote. And it is my suspicion, and maybe this is something to look at in more detail, and I'm willing to be corrected if the statistics really bear against me. That's certainly possible. But I have this feeling, I would like to think, that the attempts by the Abbott campaign to be very negative about Zali Steggall did actually rebound on them. I would like to think that they went too far and it undermined their position. But, maybe it depends on the overall context. I think in the battle between Liberal and Labor, it was to some degree a battle of ideas and to some degree a battle of personalities. And much as I would have liked to Bill Shorten to win, there were maybe some elements of his history that people could seize upon. But I think with Zali, when the Libs were throwing mud, it just didn't stick because she was too decent a person to be actually undermined. And then when it didn't stick, I'd like to think it rebounded against the Liberal Party. Okay, that's a subset of the greater political debate, and that's my, I guess, slightly more positive view of human nature of some of it. Okay, so anyway, talking about 18C, or do I want to? Okay, there's a comment here by Liga. Okay, I'll let people look at that themselves. So 18C. Now, this is a controversial one, and here we go. We'll start talking about 18C. The Pirate Party starts off celebrating the individual and sees government as something that should enable people's lives, not limit it. At the same time as we emphasise individual rights, we don't want to make claims to shore up the privilege, as when government tries to free up things for obnoxious shock jocks and political commentators, leaning on ideas of free speech while trying to prevent outsiders from scrutinising government affairs, be that our treatment of refugees or commercial in-confidence contracts between government and corporations. We believe in giving people a leg up to help them lead worthwhile lives. So it's not just the privileged who benefit from the prevailing rights, which means an integrated tax and welfare system resulting in an effective universal basic income for the less well-off and an escape from poverty traps, together with incentives for people with wealth to apply themselves productively. So while in the past the Liberal Party wanted to repeal 18C, that was not in the context of a broad support for free speech and transparency in government, but rather to selectively support the sorts of free speech that suited their cause. Now, when we talk about the repeal of 18C, it's actually in a broader context, where we're not just privileging our mates to mouth off more freely, but rather where everyone has been given a leg up. So we have cross-pollination from society that is freer on many fronts. And I would suggest if the states kick you down, and then on top of that, they're letting obnoxious shock jocks basically mouth off against you, then I guess that's a double whammy and it's even worse. But if the prevailing situation is where you are in a position of strength and you got the obnoxious shock jocks mouthing off, partially the whole power dynamic has changed and they can't get traction, and we have a totally different situation on so many fronts. So that's the context in which I support the repeal of 18C. And our current policy talks about ensuring that we have sufficient common law protections. I know our President Miles wants to link the repeal of 18C to the implementation of a Bill of Rights, which is its own issue. I don't know, Sarah has actually spoken strongly about Bill of Rights. Now, the problem in this context is not so much the presence or absence of 18C, but rather whether there's a broad recognition of our overall rights and freedoms in such a way that it benefits everybody, not just the already privileged. I appreciate that the one time The Guardian bothered to pay any attention to us and acknowledge that we even existed, they actually took a swing at us based on our 18C policy. But I personally consider that to be a badge of honour. Anyway, so UBI to come up. Okay, a bit of an exchange on Facebook, fair enough. Okay, now, universal basic income, which is my last major topic, and then I'll just go through a bit of a grab bag to fill things up to 8 p.m. And also, if there's any questions, I'll be in an even better position to answer them. Okay, so universal basic income, that's something I'm personally in favour of. And having a job guarantee in our policy has gotten us no traction. Rather, people who might have otherwise given us some credit for our job guarantee policy just end up criticising our universal basic income policy, and also vice versa. Now, I think if you're going to piss someone off, you might as well do a proper job of it rather than trying to tiptoe through some sort of medium that doesn't actually get you anywhere. Our jobs guarantee policy doesn't gain our votes, doesn't gain us positive attention, and rather gains more criticism than it does votes. Of all our policies, it's the one to me that seems to stick out like a sore thumb and is not really part of a consistent set of other policies. If we talk about it just being a trial, in a sense we've opened up Pandora's box by even mentioning it and open ourselves up to the whole muddied scene that results. Yes, we want a party that's willing to run with radical ideas, but it's a trade-off. The more radical our ideas, the harder it is going to be to credibly sell them. And I do think that a policy set, including the UBI, is a sweet spot, an optimum on this trade-off. By incorporating a job guarantee, we overload the cart and it falls over. Now, here note I'm focusing on the saleability of the different policies rather than their validity in an abstract sense. Some people believe that the UBI is not economically credible. I disagree with them. I think the universal basic income has merits and the job guarantee has problems without compensating merits. However, for this presentation, I'm focusing on the saleability and whether it fits into our policy set. I could disappear down the rabbit hole of comparing the validity of the two policies. I don't really want to do that at this stage, maybe sometime in the future. A point I'll emphasise is that as far as the general voting public is concerned, they're not going to pick over the UBI policy based on its theoretical abstracts, but rather only if they're already arrived critical of it. Only those people with a very specialised interest will bother to think about the merits of UBI versus job guarantee in a credible way. And I don't plan to get drawn into the ins and outs of it at this stage, but I don't think it's So I don't plan to get drawn into the ins and outs of the comments at this stage, but, we'll see. Now, the Australian Workers' Party might well continue to support a job guarantee. Well, then the voters of Australia can continue to support them. In the meantime, I think we should ditch the job guarantee and maintain a clear position that is much more readily costed and communicated without the spectre of a large bureaucracy to implement it. So let me have a look at okay, what some people saying the Pirate Party is the most leftist in Australia. Now, I would say we basically have a degree of scepticism about large bureaucracies, like you implemented the BATs and so on. So the universal basic income policy is about rerouting money, but it's not about large bureaucracies. It's actually about reducing the bureaucracies reducing, let's say, the machinery of government. And I think to call it the most leftist party is a strange thing. We do actually emphasise the worth of the individual, and we also emphasise the worth of individual initiative, individual business initiative. It's just that we think a lot of what the Liberal Party does is not what we call ethical business initiatives, it's rent-seeking. So positive business initiative is something that the Pirate Party gets behind. Anyway, so I think mostly people are discussing this amongst themselves, and I wonder if they're paying me any attention, but never mind. But anyway, so what are we at? We're at 7:50. Let me just have a look here if anybody else has been... Okay, nothing there. Okay, I will go... Okay, so as I say, if we do have people asking me some questions, I'll see how I can answer them. Now, further developing this thing about business initiative, that there is a positive business initiative. With intellectual property, it is about corporations trying to own and control culture, which is not what business should be doing. I think there's a very legitimate role for business, value adding in an ethical way, and basically paying your fair share of tax. And what the Liberal Party is doing is basically letting businesses get away with blue murder. And I do emphasise business has an important role to play. And in our Pirate Party platform, we say that the role of government in the economy should be limited, that basically government should be there to facilitate the mainstream economy, not to intervene in every aspect of our lives. And we do believe in transparency. Now, I think it's very problematic that we have privatisation, and if not privatisation, contracts between government and corporations where those contracts are not transparent and they are commercial in confidence. And I have to say that is the worst of both worlds. I mean, government can do government things, corporations can do corporate things, and good luck to the two of them. But when you mix them together and have confidential contracts, I think that's very problematic. So anyway, so I would have to say there's a lot of good things that business can do. The problem is that the bad side of business is what's represented in the Liberal Party, and I think the Labor Party doesn't really engage with that reality. But I think we do, emphasise the worth of the individual. That's where we start, and the worth of private individual enterprise. That's good, so long as you're not rent-seeking, so long as you're not unfairly trying to claim the commons. Now, the other thing, I guess we've also got foreign policy and refugee policies and that sort of thing. And I guess I did earlier mention Sustainable Australia. And there's some arguments that are kicking around with Sustainable Australia that I have a decent amount of sympathy with. And that's that the level of immigration we have means that we're really building our infrastructure at the rate of about 4% a year, where we should really only be building it at about 2% a year. And when you're building it at 4% a year, basically you trip over yourself because you need to build so much of it. And, you can sort of say, oh, well, we're being selfish. And I think there's a certain degree to which there's a justified selfishness in context. Because in the Pirate Party, we believe in increasing our aid to the UN recommended level. So, in a sense, if we can be a global citizen that is making a good-hearted attempt to do our best in the world and try to make the rest of the world a better place and play our part, then that means that we can start to worry about our own personal conditions and the quality of the life we have around us. And I think development and the development lobby is certainly a part of that. And notice that's one of the things where I do have some sympathy with the sort of the approach of Sustainable Australia. Obviously, I'm not going all the way down their particular path. In far as defence policy goes, we are saying, look, we want a more independent defence policy when we're not just kowtowing to the US. And I'm talking about the way things are arseholes and so on. There's a book called Game of Mates, which does actually talk about how a lot of businesses are abusing their privileges and swindling us. And, at least in Sydney, we know that the casino has a privileged position when it comes to, having alcohol, late night trading, and there's stories about, violence and suicides related to the Star Casino. But put that to one side. You've got, the pubs and clubs. You've got the tobacco lobby that I think have an inappropriate hold on government policy. Having said that, people might smoke. People can, do acts of self-harm within reason as long as the only people they're affecting are themselves. But I think it's a sad majority of smokers we see are not being ethical in how they conduct themselves. So I wonder, oh dear. Okay. Someone's mentioned nuclear, plans on how to win in the future. Well, I think I've sort of bared on plans of how to win in the future. But let's see, we're approaching 7:55. I guess I probably have run out of things to talk about at this point. So so anyway, I suppose I will. I'll probably bring things to a close now. So thank you everybody who has listened. I hope you found this post-election review interesting, and this has been the experience I've had. And for some of you who might well have either helped out or contributed to the fund for covering our candidates' deposits, that's very much appreciated. We certainly appreciate the money that's coming in from others. So okay, so anyway, okay, Leo has actually said something good. So, okay, thank you for your comment, Leo. All right, look, I will actually bring things to a close. We've only got about 4 minutes to 8, and I think I have run out of things to say. But I think I've filled out an hour reasonably well. I'd like to think so. Hopefully you'll agree with that. Anyway, I'll press finish on the phone, and that'll be it.